Hey, everybody out there. We're back with a special topic today, Biden's next Supreme Court pick, which is sure to be controversial. The controversy has started already on this. And with us today is Bryant Thomas, former AP newsman in the Washington, D.C. Bureau, long history of radio news and commentary. Also, John Woodford, who has acted as an editor and in a number of news outlets over the years. And Kent Garrett, who was my news director up in Binghamton, New York a while back. And so the topic today is Biden's next Supreme Court pick. Now, the controversy really centers on him saying ahead of time that he's narrowing his search to a Black woman. He's receiving criticism for that. Some people are claiming it's actually discriminatory under federal laws because you can't involve race in hiring. Others say that, it's overdue and there's nothing wrong with that. So let's start with John Woodford. What do you think, John?
Well, I think it was to me, a foolish, self-defeating, and I believe not just unwise, but also an unprincipled thing to say. The Supreme Court, I mean, it's sort of doubling down on what I can think, some identity politics or administration is called for, and we know when it is, when it used to come under the affirmative action laws. But the Supreme Court is supposed to be go to people who are excellent jurists. Now, we know the Supreme Court has been a political football through its history, but that doesn't mean that you would say the type of person and narrow it down to ethnic identity would be, or sexual identity. This where would it stop? If you wanted to do that, even let's say he has it, he's intending to do that, why wouldn't you be smart enough just to come up with a slate of a lot of good people of all sorts, and then lean in whatever you're going to do and make your selection and have them all be excellent jurists of many different backgrounds? That would be a way to go. This to me is so silly because it's kind of asking to lose. I can't wonder whether he's just stupid or if he is intentionally fumbling, or is he virtue signaling to some audience or potential voters who he imagines out there. I don't know what he's doing, but I don't think it's a good idea.
I think it's just, I don't feel that strongly about it, but I think it's sort of clumsy in the sense that he should have picked someone, or if he had made it ideological, that would have been very different. But I think he was clumsy, and I think he was trying to satisfy Clyburn, in South Carolina. And I think Reagan at some point, as I recall, did say the same thing about making an appointment. I don't think it's such a big deal.
Yeah,
it could have been handled better.
It's nothing new. They always select, the presidents always select according to conservative, liberal, and, of course, Sandra Day O'Connor, the first woman, so there's always been that kind of selective process. But other than the rare occasion with Bush, they didn't telegraph it, especially with all the racial division now. That's just going to increase the controversy and the resentment. He could have very well picked her, whoever he's going to pick, a Black female, but just don't say it's because it's a Black female. So yeah, it was politically counterproductive, I think. What do you think, Brian?
Well, look, this is no secret. He made this as a campaign pledge. This should come as no surprise to anybody that he's going to pick a Black woman. Nothing has changed in all of the time since he was campaigning, and now we're into his second year as a president.
Right.
One thing I'd like to point out, if you go back in history, and both of these gentlemen that are sitting at our table here should remember this. In 1972, Mad Magazine was probably at its zenith in terms of popularity. And they did a parody on Supreme Court nominees involving Richard Nixon and George McGovern. And one of the lines that they had in this picture of Richard Nixon with a clenched fist at a campaign rally saying, "Vote for me," I'll finish packing the Supreme Court with narrow-minded nebbishes. I'll repeal the rest of the Bill of Rights, and I'll make Indochina look like the bottom of a shake and bake bag.
Right.
How much has changed over 50 years? Not much.
Yeah. But again, you know, with a heightened sensitivity now about race issues, I agree with John that this is really a very clumsy move politically. I mean, you know, he could have just appointed a black female, which he promised to do during the campaign, without saying it had to be a black female. You know, and this is, I think, typical of their whole woke progressive attachments that's building more and more resentment now among the white, not just the white population, but a lot of minorities who don't go along with this extreme liberalism. And he's just, you know, underscoring that all the time. And I think it's because they don't realize the mood of the public generally.
I mean, I think there was a poll out actually today from, it might have been Ipsos or something, saying that 76% of Americans wanted Biden to consider all all nominees. But I mean, I think you could argue also that it's a bit of honesty. I mean, in the sense that you know, the Democrats are being straight up and are being pretty honest about what's going on.
Yeah, he's saying with other
I don't think
presidents,
that if they were honest about everything, I would go with that. But I don't see them as being particularly honest about a lot of other things. So I don't think that's what's really motivating them. When did he make? I wasn't aware that he made any kind of promise to do this. Unless I'd like to find when and where he ever
did
made
it in South Carolina when right before Clyburn got everybody together and got everybody to jump out of the race. He made the promise to Clyburn that he was going to appoint a black woman to this.
He made a promise to people he was going to have a build back better with all sorts of features, good for medical care and good for, you know, sundry other kinds of topics and issues that he was going to deliver on. He hasn't delivered on many of them. As far as I'm concerned, this could have been just another thing for him not to say too much about, if he was trying to be effective.
If you took Sinema and Manchin out of the equation, Joe Biden would be in a totally different place today than he is now. That's his problem right there. Are those two, and Build Back Better and all of the other things that he wanted to bring into being in his first term as president, assuming that he gets a second, are now being held in abeyance simply because of the actions of those two senators. But more importantly, in terms of choosing a nominee for the court, you know, the Republicans have shoved the Federalist Society down our throats for decades,
Right.
and nobody squawks about that. They think it's just wonderful. And that's what I think the problem is when somebody else is doing the talking, all of a sudden what they're saying is repugnant.
Yeah, as a matter of fact, Trump presented a list of candidates from the Federalists, but it wasn't broken down in terms of sex and race.
Right. You can Biden could say he wanted to get a Supreme Court justice who would defend the public's voting rights and who would stand up to special interests wherever they are. You know, he could describe the behavior of a liberal Supreme Court justice in the same kind of terms that Trump and those Federalists described what they were looking for. And I think most of the country probably would have thought you're going to get a pretty good person if you do that.
Yeah, you know, the two main candidates appear to be Michelle Childs and also Jackson. Now, Childs may be the inside favorite because don't forget, she was backed by Claiborne.
Right.
In fact, that's when Biden made the promise to Claiborne, yeah, okay, I'll appoint a black woman to the Supreme Court, and he's pushing for her. And also Lindsey Graham is pushing for him, and the other senators. So both senators from South Carolina are pushing for it. And Claiborne, of course, who was instrumental in making Biden president, is pushing for him. So, she may be the inside favorite. Just a review on what Clyburn did. Some people may forget that before the South Carolina primary, Biden was on the ropes. He was going down and down in all these primaries. Camel had already dropped out. Then he got together with Clyburn, who promised his backing for the South Carolina primary to bring in the minority vote in exchange for these promises, including a Black Supreme Court justice. And that's what revived Biden's candidacy. And that's
so you find that offensive?
Well, I find, I find this kind of, there's always horse trading in all this.
Yeah, there it is.
But the point I'm making, not so much I'm offended, I'm just making the point that these are the pressures that Biden is answering to. Now, all presidents do that, but I'm just saying these are the mechanisms behind the scene. It was Clyburn is really responsible for making Biden president. So it looks like Biden is going to dance to his tune.
I mean, I think the Republicans would have found something to argue about no matter what he did.
That's right.
He was in a no-win situation. I mean, I think the most outrageous thing is that, I don't know how you guys feel about it, but Cruz is out there saying that this whole thing is an insult to Black women. And I mean, I don't see where he gets that from, but that's what he's been out there saying.
What's his reasoning with that? I don't get it myself.
Well, I think he's going to the affirmative action argument that, it sort of means that he's not going to end up with the best, put it that way.
Well, the thing is, Biden gave him those
that ammunition,
weapons, the ammo,
right,
given it to him. And as far as I will get into Clyburn, it's not as if Clyburn represents the most progressive kind of Black politician or movement person either, if you go into his past. And the way we got Clarence Thomas. So the fact you're going to get a Black Supreme Court justice, and you just sort of described him, whether this is a Black woman one, what if she's of the same philosophical bent as some of the more moderate or right-wing Supreme Court justices? Then where are you?
Yeah.
Well, and that happens many times. We've had nominees get confirmed to the court and they do 180s on political philosophy.
Yeah,
So
but we don't even
you're
know.
right.
I don't
You're
even
right.
know what some of these are. I mean, some of them could be outstanding. I would like to see the opinions of some of these. It could be that, I know that there's a Black federal judge, a man in our area in Michigan, who wrote a tremendous brief in the case for an education case in Detroit to try to justify better education for poor kids. And it's a wonderful, I mean, he's the kind of person that ought to be on the Supreme Court. It was such a beautiful decision. But we don't know what some of these women stand for. And to think that we can't think automatically that you said that the Republicans in South Carolina want this person too.
Yeah, both senators.
Yeah, she's been. She's been.
They want Childs, Michelle Childs.
They want Michelle Childs.
Yeah.
And she's the only one that's really not out of that Ivy League bag that everybody else is in.
Right.
And she's from Detroit, as a matter of fact. That's where she grew up. And I think her dad was a police officer. So, I mean, she really brings some kind of grassroots reality to the Supreme Court.
We don't know her opinions or where she stands in legal. She could be another representative, essentially, of like most Supreme Court justices have been in our history. They are mouthpieces for rich people.
Well, the thing is, so her expert
to do with the rights of unions and so forth. Our Supreme Court is one of the worst judicial bodies in the so-called free world.
But I mean, I don't know her case history, but Childs is a an expert on employment law and I forget the other thing, labor law. I mean, that's been
Yeah,
her.
sometimes those people are they can be an expert on it.
True, true.
We don't know if they've been an expert who sides with the companies and the monopolies.
Yeah.
Right. Well, Clyburn considers her moderate enough to get Republican support, and he's told Biden that, according to reports. Now, among her decisions, court rulings that could create some controversy and some openings for Republicans to attack her is a ruling that she made on absentee ballot envelopes. Because of the pandemic, they didn't require the previously required witness signature. And so that was eventually overturned, by the way, by the US Supreme Court. So there's a couple of things that Republicans can find openings. And also, two big cases are going to come up for anybody who was appointed is abortion and gun rights. And both of these justices that we mentioned, Michelle Childs and Jackson, tend to be on the liberal side. So even though the Republicans may go tread easily because they don't want to be considered racist or insensitive, there may be some openings for them to create some division there on some of the rulings, even though both of these candidates and others seem generally very well qualified with their backgrounds.
I think what the bigger issue is here is that Republicans don't want to lose any more votes in November. It's already a tenuous thing that they will automatically recapture the Senate and the House. And the last thing they need to do is stir up everybody on the far left to make that even harder. So I think they're going to be very cautious about how they attack this person, whoever it is that gets put on the court along racial lines. If they aren't, that could very well blow up in their face in November.
See, I see just the opposite. Brian and I really are of a divided opinion on this. I think it's just the opposite. I think the polls are showing that people don't like the extreme identity politics, the wokeness, the progressiveness, and all that. Law and order is tied in with the perception that Democrats are soft on crime, et cetera, et cetera. So I think if Republicans do attack her, I think it'd actually increase their chances of turning around in the midterms.
Maybe in the Trump circles they would. He's got those, the Republicans have those votes anyway. The moderates are the ones that they've got to worry about. And the moderates still haven't weighed in large portion on these congressional races. They're still very close in terms of the swing districts. Real Clear Politics shows no big runaway for the Republicans so far in these off-year elections. That's got to be troubling for the GOP.
The polls are showing, though, that most people, including Blacks, Hispanics, other minorities, are tending Republican now. A lot of them are leaving Democratic Party. The polls are showing that, even with so-called liberal polls.
I don't see that, but maybe you have information that I'm not privy to. But I just think that, if you're going to talk about a party that has hemorrhaged voters like the Republicans have since Trump left office, you've got to get those voters back. And so far, all you've got is the Trump gang. You don't really have the moderates yet. And I don't know what it's going to take to get them back, but I think carping over a Supreme Court nominee is not the way to do it.
Yeah, I agree with you also. I mean, I think, don't forget, it's like 300 years of white Christian males. And I mean, that's a heavy duty argument, that it's time for a Black woman.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think anybody's disputing that point that it's time, to have that kind of racial balance on the court. But again, by him emphasizing that those are, you have to be Black and you have to be female to even be considered.
Yeah, those are not qualifications. Those should not be. Once you have qualifications of that sort for the Supreme Court, where's it going to end? And next we have to have the gay Asian seat, and the tranny Hispanic seat, and all that kind of. I mean, it's absurd, really, to me, to have to think that these kinds of identifications would be baked into qualifications, not just for the for anything, but for the Supreme Court and other jobs. It's to me too. It's asking. You're going to turn away the voters that Bryant said that he should be trying to get, not just because, not on the basis of they're even. It's just, I think it just smells to a lot of people to imagine a politics laden with this kind of calculating and calculations. It's not what, it doesn't make for the right kind of body politic, really, among the citizens. You want to have people they can just get behind. They could get behind a person. I mean, Thurgood Marshall was a very popular Supreme Court justice.
Oh.
And, you know, and then now they have several women justices. Of course, what's her name who died?
Ginsburg.
Ginsburg, she's a very popular justice. So these people all had certain identities, but it wasn't as if their identity was the thing that they were picked for the court for. But here you're saying this identity is why you're picked for the court.
No.
It doesn't, you know, it's not a good way to go to me.
Which
I
gives,
think that there's good logic in that. But I think if you look at the years we've had to put up with Republican presidents shoving conservative justices down our throats, that's the reason there is this swing to the left. I think that's part of it right there.
Not even the left necessarily. That's the problem to me too with the two. I hope maybe it's to the left, maybe not. A lot of people said they were happy to have Clarence Thomas nominated.
and don't forget the Democrats attacked Clarence Thomas roundly.
But then they pulled in their.
But they didn't do it on the basis.
I wish Biden. My wife came up with this idea. Biden ought to nominate Anita Hill.
But, you know, the thing that is, this is a no-win for Biden. He could put God up there as a
Right.
and it wouldn't matter.
But he
The
did it
Republicans would
himself.
find a way to take a leak on it, and that's cut and dry. So I think he's making it easier for Republicans, certainly, by promising a black woman, but it wouldn't matter who we put up there. They'll go after him or her no matter what.
So why make it easy?
Yeah.
Well, that's
You
right.
know, why give them the?
I agree.
Yeah, because I think
think-
he wants to. I think he was thinking, and I don't know if this has happened. I haven't seen any polls yet, but I mean, I think he's hoping that his poll numbers will go up if he makes this.
I think that's about the depth. To me, that's about the depth of what he.
Well, no, I'm just saying what I think they were thinking when they made it. And again, I agree. I think it's clumsy, but don't forget, for 300 years, it's been all about identity, and that identity has been white Christian male.
Well, no one ever. There was never.
It just didn't say it, John. It just didn't
We're
say it.
going to appoint an older white man to the Supreme Court. That was never said. It may be what was happening.
They just
But
didn't say it that they
wasn't
did it. It's
really.
still identity
It
politics.
wasn't an overt declared qualification
I agree with you.
to be,
I
and
agree
that's
with you.
that's what's wrong with this.
Yeah.
But this is a bit of honesty, though. I mean, this is some honesty for the.
Yeah.
Not if it's just a move to try to move up in the polls or whatever other his motive is. I don't know if that's all that honest.
And Ken, in terms of race relations, this is red meat for the real bigots out there and the real racists out there saying, see, it's because she's black and a woman, not because she's qualified. You know, even though that isn't true, she is well qualified, but that's throwing out more bait.
Yeah, but so what is he supposed to do? Satisfy the bigots out there?
Oh,
No,
no.
he draws up a slate. He draws up a slate of excellent.
No, I agree. I agree with you on
And-
that. I think
and
it was clumsy.
they're not all the same kind of person. And then they come up with their appointment based on what do you want to say? This person's record as a jurist is outstanding, and we're for this person. Then maybe the person's going to get knocked out. Maybe not. I mean, we knocked out. Bork was nominated, and Bork was considered an excellent legal mind and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
And I'm glad they knocked him out, but they didn't go after him by saying, Bork is a Scandinavian name, and we've had so and so many Scandinavian white males of a sort, and for that reason, we're going to try to knock him out, you know?
Yeah, Brian, Ken, you're saying what he's supposed to do. Yeah, what he should do. Okay, appoint a black female, but don't say that's why she's being appointed. You know, just hold your fire on that and do what other presidents have done. They've appointed their people according, to their political beliefs, conservative, liberal, a balance, a woman, the first black guy, the second black guy, Thomas. So it's always been done, and that's understood. But to emphasize that right off the bat again, I think just exacerbates this racial divide in this country, which I think is increasing under Biden, and that's dangerous.
Oh, I don't see that at all. I think it increased. It increased under Trump to the point of stupidity, and I think it's continuing because every time he opens his mouth, he gets traction, and that's the cause right there. I don't think Biden contributes to that in the least. I think it's all Trump, honey.
Brian, how many times has he said that the biggest threat to this country is not Al Qaeda, not foreign enemies, not China that he was a cheerleader for, but white supremacy? How do you think white people are going to react to something like that?
Well, if you're not a white supremacist, you wouldn't have a problem.
I've got a problem with it. I'm not a white supremacist. I think that's pandering to the minority base that he used, that he pandered to get elected. What kind of a statement is that from a president of the United States? White supremacy is the biggest threat to this nation, bigger than Al Qaeda. I mean, that's absurd. Along with these other absurd extreme positions from the progressive left and the woke and the identity politics. That's what's driving people nuts.
Well, it's driving certain people nuts, I agree, but not necessarily the whole country.
I think
people like you, Larry. People like you.
This is interesting because Brian and I go way back there. We both start off as liberal Democrats, and I'm still a Democrat, by the way. But Brian never veered from his original Democratic tenets, and he doesn't see how the party has changed. I do. That's the big difference.
But I think the thing is, politics is supposed to be, the art of the possible, and also you're supposed to figure out how to win. So I would like to see a little bit more backroom thinking on the part of the Democrats, where they didn't keep doing things so clumsily and keep messing up a situation where it looks as if they are going to be strong and they wind up weak and weak and weaker. You wonder, why is that?
You've got that right on the head, John. Larry and I have talked about this before, and that is Republicans will coalesce around a message, a campaign message, and they will harp on it even when it's total BS until it becomes fact and until it starts to resonate with voters. Democrats cower in the corner instead of doing the same thing, and that's their problem. They don't know how to go for the throat. They don't know how to keep attacking that throat until it bleeds blood. And that's the problem.
Yeah, instead of saying, for example, white supremacy is the biggest, why wouldn't you say that, injustice to parts of our own people, historic injustices, of which there are several kinds, including not just, I would say, racism, and including not having sufficient health care and education. The poor, our public sector, our public things are weak. These are the threats to the country. Why not make it a description of our problems as a country that would make people want to see programs like the Build, what the Build Back Better was supposed to be, but they never sold it properly or effectively to people. The Build Back Better, they just think they can just go spout out BBB and people are suddenly going to jump behind them. They don't make they don't build up from bottom up. I don't know. They're run by a very elitist kind of person. That's their problem. One of their problems. The Republicans are too, but the Republicans know how to do the demagogue kind of a thing.
Oh, sure.
And the Democrats used to have people who could go out and meet with regular folks and explain things to them and attract them and be like FDR and all that sort of a thing. But I don't see that. I see some of them in certain states, but I don't see it in the national figures that they are putting out there. They have a lot of elitist, arrogant type people high up who, to me, seem snooty and insulting to a lot of Americans who aren't rich.
Don't forget the quote attributed to Barack Obama that don't underestimate Joe's ability to F things up.
Well, it could be. I mean, we don't know yet.
But he's going to apparently make the decision at the end of this month, at the end of February.
Yeah, I mean, how about how they pushed out poor Breyer? You know, they leaked the story, and I don't know when Breyer. I guess Breyer's going to retire in a couple of months because Biden says he'll have a nominee selected by the end of February, March.
Yeah, end of this
At
month.
the end of February,
Yeah.
Yeah, but Brian, he says he's going to stay until they get someone else. I mean, Breyer.
Well, I mean, Biden is speeding up the process. I mean, I understand why he's doing that.
Yeah, I'm glad they. I mean, I hope they get one in there. Get somebody in there who's good.
That's a good point. The last thing they want to do is start running the clock on this. If the Republicans take over in 2023, game over. They'll never get anybody on the court.
Yeah, how about these calls by Democrats to pack the court? Oh, I mean, reform the court. Now, I don't know.
Yeah, you can do anything if you got the power to do it.
Yeah,
that's right.
If you don't have the votes to do these things, you shouldn't be talking about them.
Yeah,
That's right. Exactly.
see, that was another thing that Biden emphasized publicly, which you shouldn't have, about we're going to review the Supreme Court. Maybe there should be term limits. Maybe we should expand the number of justices. All this stuff he put out in his first weeks in office. And, that got everybody on the attack. I mean, he was supposed to be a unifier. Now, despite, the merits or demerits of the various positions among Democrats and Republicans, if you're going to unite the country, you don't engage in that kind of inflammatory rhetoric, which he and everybody around him do.
Look, the Republicans have this stance in negotiation, and I've watched these guys for 45 years. Let's negotiate. Their definition of negotiate is do it our way.
Yeah.
Don't ever forget that. That's what they mean, and that's what they do.
And Democrats don't do that when they're in power?
They haven't been in power long enough to know that.
Oh.
That's my point. If you have a party that is polarized as the Republicans are now, and it's only because they seize on an issue and keep harping on it until it becomes gospel, it works. Keep that in mind. All of this has worked for them for a lot of years, and they're not going to change because it's winning.
Another factor is how the press is no longer an objective observer and purveyor of facts. They've all become cheerleaders and propagandists on one side or the other. So it's more and more difficult for the public to get any real, accurate information that they could believe in. There's more and more skepticism about any of this information coming from any of the news outlets. And that's
they could come to the four of us and they'd have it all figured out.
That's right.
We'd have to take over some of these newspapers. Because, I agree. There's these CNN and especially MSNBC and a lot of these things, these channels, they are not even effective in trusting the news. I would trust the objective news really to explain things to people in such a way that they make their own conclusions. You don't have to preach to them in the news. They have in the New York Times now a lot of these articles that are supposed to be news articles. It used to be you say news analysis, a little thing you would warn people this is an opinion piece, not just on the op-ed page, but in the news pages. But now the news pages are filled with articles that have opinions. Slanted terminology and loaded words being thrust in by the so-called reporter.
Presented as straight news reports, not editorial.
More and more of that. We would have got, I'm on the copy desk we would have got rid of that stuff as soon as we saw it. You know, back in the day, the reporter sticking their own things in there, unsupported in loaded terms, you know, out comes the pen.
Yeah. Now, Ken, you know, when you were working back, what was in the 70s at CBS and what, NBC?
Yeah, in other words, I spent from 86 to 96 at CBS, and then from 96 to about, well, no, actually, yeah, about 20 years altogether, but in the 90s and 80s, yeah.
All right, and you knew Brokaw, and you knew Rather. You worked
Yeah,
with
yeah.
them. Now, you know, I assume that they had strong political opinions, but, you know, maybe some of the reporting was somewhat slanted one way or the other, but not as
Oh, no, I agree. Not as it
obvious
is
as
now.
it is today, right?
Right, exactly. Yeah, yeah. I mean, I think now, I mean, if the average layman wants to get news, he just has to have several sources. You know, you can't, you have to read the Times plus something else, or the New York Post and something else. You just can't get your news from one source. But I mean, I think that, but there is an independent media out there that's pretty good. I mean, but people have to try and find it.
It's harder and harder to, and plus, you know, more of it is filtered out by the platforms, by the social media platforms.
Yeah, yeah, that's another big problem.
Yeah.
Well, if you look back, the objectivity that you long for was probably there, you know, in the 70s and 80s and 60s. And then Fox News came along and turned the whole thing on its ear.
Yeah, yeah.
And that's the problem now. In order to remain competitive, these other branches of the electronic media have to present something that's just as excitable as the product that Fox News is presenting. And it's a business decision. And I think I had a boss that I worked for in Hartford who was brilliant. And when he found out I was teaching at the University of Connecticut, he said, "What do you tell your kids about being a news person?" And I said, "Well, it's all nice if you remember all these ethereal things that they teach you in elementary journalism, but the thing you must remember when you get in the field is this is a business.
Right.
Don't ever lose sight of that. It's a business." And those are the most sage comments I ever heard from a general manager.
Right. I mean, most of my career, it wasn't a business. It didn't become a business until the end, the end of my career at NBC News.
Yeah.
Because before then, the news was never thought of as a profit center. I mean, it was almost embarrassing to sort of think about money and think about how much they make on the news. But that all changed when these corporations, specifically when GE took over NBC, for example. Then NBC Nightly News was a profit center. It was how much money can you make and how much money. And then it all changed. I mean, back in the day, the first, 15, 20 minutes of a half hour news broadcast was pretty much the top stories and but after that, it became what was the marketing decision in terms of what stories are going to help the ratings, what stories is going to increase the ratings and that sort of stuff. But I mean, those days are here now where it's all corporate. As you say, it's business. Yeah. It is all business, you know.
And Telecommunications Act of 1996 changed everything.
Yeah.
All it did was, cement a small coterie of owners and Wall Street types into the position of being able to buy and sell all of these profits, all of these news operations and broadcast outlets together, and therefore homogenize the product, which is exactly what happened.
Brian, why don't you review that for our listeners who may not be familiar with that Communications Act, what it did, what it changed?
Well, for years and years, we had a 7, 7, and 7 rule. You could own 7 AMs, 7 FMs, and 7 TVs in the same market. That was it. You could not own more than that anywhere. There had to be 7. They could be in different markets, but you couldn't have a total of more than 21, 7 of each. The Telecommunications Act of 96 changed all of that. All of a sudden, you could own as many as you wanted to. So
imagine who wrote the act.
Oh, yeah,
You imagine put the language in the act,
yes, exactly.
and
So
paid
what
all the
happened,
politicians.
what happened is you had, and this is what happened to me in Hartford. Um, American Radio came along and started buying up all these properties. They started in Boston, where the two principals of the company were located, and they started gobbling up these stations and immediately jettisoning staff that were too expensive, gutting news departments, and then turning it into a multiple so that they could sell it as a block. And one of the big jokes that I made was right after I was fired, there was an article in the Hartford Courant about, well, don't judge us by this one act, judge us by what we do next year. Well, next year they had built the empire up to 200 stations, and the first thing they did was to sell it to CBS. And that's what happened there. So, and then what did CBS do? They took all the junk stations that they had acquired under the American Radio emblem, and they got rid of all of them because they knew they would never turn a profit. So it all became a question of how much money we can make by turning these monoliths of information over at one time. And, it's still going on now.
Yeah. It's
Yeah,
and also the way the media is no longer defending its own. They're chipping away at the First Amendment. Case in point, Julian Assange. Nobody's coming to his defense.
right.
And
Right.
that case is
Not
important.
in the mainstream. None of the mainstream companies of any medium has any. They ignore the case or print the. Essentially, it's the State Department, Pentagon,
Yeah.
what they've told people to say about the case. He's a threat to national security or something of that sort. And yeah, the principles of freedom of information and journalism and press, and speech, and so forth, ignored.
Look at the New York Times and the Washington Post in the days of the Pentagon Papers, how they published them despite the threat by the Nixon administration.
Right.
And the Supreme Court sided with the newspapers. They couldn't get prior restraint. These newspapers are no longer crusading for the First Amendment. It's just the opposite now. They've become part of the corporate machine. And this, Brian and I talk about this a lot. To me, this is an existential threat to the nation, because once you wipe out a free press as a watchdog, a guardian, the only information you're going to get is what the whatever administration is in office chooses to let you hear. So there's no longer any free flow of information or check and balance on the government. And this is going on more and more. They're chipping away at it. And pretty soon we're going to end up with state news. We're halfway there already.
And we have people, so-called liberals, and justifying censorship and turning over to these moguls out in Silicon Valley the right to decide what can even reach our eyes and ears.
Yeah. You get a bunch of idiot kids working for these social media sites, deciding what's acceptable and what has to be censored. I mean, it's
Yeah.
And the clumsiness with which they've responded to all of these criticisms to Facebook and YouTube and any of the other social media providers, the clumsiness with which they've responded to those criticisms and lawsuits proves your point that exactly the kids don't know experience.
Yeah.
Experience comes with age.
Well, I definitely think that Kent Garrett should be censored, but the rest of us, I think, should be free.
Yeah. Yeah, well, we really have a mess. I mean, I like following the whole COVID reporting and talking about COVID.
Yeah.
I like to look at the scientists. I mean, scientists of a sort who can't get on YouTube or various these platforms. They can't get on anymore if they just question the emperor's line about the source of the COVID.
John, the fact that you brought up COVID means that I'm going to have to avoid putting this up on YouTube. I'll put it up on my other social media.
Yeah.
They already took down one of my posts.
Is that right? Really?
Which was a satire on Biden, which was based on all this stupid stuff that he says. I mean,
Yeah.
it was very accurate, but they took it down. You could see it on my other sites if you go to my.
Really?
What did they tell you when you took? When they
What did they say?
What did they say?
It was disinformation about COVID.
Yeah, yeah, disinformation. That's what That's what they always say. That's the label.
Now I know
Disinformation.
Brian's a big believer in the efficacy of the vaccine, but as John has pointed out, there are very reputable doctors that are at least raising some questions about the unknown long-term effects, about other therapies that are more effective, including ivermectin, which you cannot get anybody to prescribe for you anymore, other kinds of treatments, even the monoclonal stuff now, they're wiping out because they're focused on COVID vaccines, which are making tons of money for big pharma, which supports the politicians' campaigns. So it's, one hand washes the other. That's what's going on.
Not only that, there's such evidence that you're not supposed to go into the evidence that supports the notion that it's, some say, highly likely that it did leak out of a gain and function illegal experiments going on in China that Fauci permitted.
Yeah.
And we weren't, and then of course, Fauci and these others could never say they did that because they could probably be taken to jail for violating some national security law, because undoubtedly it was probably secret, germ warfare, what you might want to call it.
Yeah, Fauci funded the thing for.
Yeah.
He did.
Yeah.
And that's another example of how they cover this stuff up. Now, again, getting back to real, objective, and investigative reporting. Any investigative reporter in the tradition of investigative reporting would have found it fit to investigate the possibility, at least, that it leaked from the Wuhan lab, which is only a short distance away from the alleged site of the elite through bats or whatever the hell it was. I mean, wasn't that enough to set off a curiosity and at least an investigation into the possibility that it leaked from the lab? But that was shut down by Fauci and others. No, there's no way it could have leaked from the lab. I mean, this is what is going on with the news media that used to be objective, aggressive, and a watchdog for the public. That's all gone.
Don't you feel that the news has been that way in terms of Trump? I mean, that there's been a renaissance almost of investigative journalism.
Well, they went after Trump every which way they could, so
Right.
Yeah, they were doing some investigation that way. A lot of it was phony, like the Russian collusion stuff, And I'm not a supporter of Trump. I try to explain this to Brian. I'm not a fan of Trump, but what I'm saying is the way they went after Trump on made up charges because they wanted to get him politically also was destroying the objectivity of the media, which has now become a standard to politicize everything. This is one thing after another with the media, and when you have just state news, it's George Orwell's 1984.
But all the people that went down with Trump and went down because of Trump is not fake news.
It depends on what the charges were, Brian. I mean, that's a whole other session that we'd have to get into. But a lot of this stuff was just made up, and also it was selective prosecution. Trump does something, they go after him tooth and nail. Hunter Biden does something, and he's free, he's scot-free. Now that's another example of how they buried that Hunter Biden laptop story before the election. It wasn't just, well, he's the president's son, what does it have to do with Biden? On that laptop, which Hunter has not denied is his, he hasn't denied the authenticity of the emails contained on it. In those emails, it shows that President Biden was benefiting from these deals that Hunter was making with Ukrainian principals, with Russians, and with Chinese, and that's all on the laptop. They shut it down before the election. As a matter of fact, here's an example, Brian. You weren't even aware of that story because it was only found on Fox News and on the New York Post and other media sites, which were hard to find. Otherwise, people didn't even know about that story. That's a legitimate story to pursue, and they shut that down.
Well, I think there might be something to it, but I cannot get my arms around Fox News and the New York Post as credible sources for that kind of stuff. I just
Right.
can't.
I've said repeatedly, Fox News has its own slants, its own agenda. I agree with that. I admit that. However, at least they get these stories out, even though they're doing it to get at the Democrats, but they get the stories out that are not being covered by other media. And that would the Hunter Biden laptop story is a legitimate story that should be pursued, and Biden himself and his son should be prosecuted if what's on that email proves to be accurate, and they haven't denied it.
In the meantime, who gets to sit on the court?
Yeah, who gets to the court? And we'll know at the end of the month.
All right, guys, I guess we could wrap this up for now, but this was a great session. We should
All right,
have
thank
that
you.
together.
Very good.
And
That was fun.
I thank you all for joining us, John Woodford, Kent Garrett,
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.
Bryant, and myself, Larry Sparano. And guys out there, I hope you enjoyed this as much as we did. We'll be back with another topic fairly soon. Thanks for joining us.
All right.
Right now.
Way to
Right.
go.
Bye-bye.
Yeah,
Yes.
see you guys.
I feel like I will be on it.
Take it easy.